systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Yo, what's going on, golf fans? It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our DFS live stream for this week's RBC Canadian Open. We're going to get you ready for all of your lineups with everything you need before lock to get towards the top end of those GPPs. So feel free to hit me up with any questions that you've got that can be process-based or player pool-based, any player deep dives that you guys want us to go through with the stats. Pretty much anything that you're curious about heading into tomorrow, feel free to go ahead and pick my brain on it. But hopefully Wednesday is treating you guys nicely out there and you're ready and stoked to talk about all the golf for this week, just as I am. And it's our last week before Oakmont in the major. Next week is going to be an absolute epic one in Pittsburgh. I'm going to be with boots on the ground, by the way, Tuesday through Sunday next week. So I am very much so looking forward to there. And if you guys didn't know, big Steeler fan, I'm actually from the area. I played Oakmont growing up all the time. So it's going to be a little bit of a homecoming, both for me visiting some friends and family and playing a golf course and seeing a golf course that I'm super familiar with. So I'm looking forward to that. We also have the special live stream that'll be next Wednesday for James, which I'm looking forward to as well. A lot of fun stuff going on. But this week, we've got ourselves one last week, a little warm up before then. So let's make good advantage of it. So we got Johnny down there, Go Collect as well. Thank you for the kind words, by the way. Alan, we got you down there too. See Floyd, Carolina Reaper, Adam as well, Steven and Brant. Sweaty tryhards that you love to see down there. And I love what Adam said. He said he's still waiting to build our lineups. That's what our guy James would have liked, right? Wait till we get all the information before lock. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And he said, Luke, how about it? Cheers to you, boss, man. Let's get after it this week. So I love Brant, which, by the way, Brant's, we've had a good time on the golf course before. We met at the RBC Heritage a few years back. So cheers to you, my man. So let's talk through the slate this week. So we've got a brand new golf course if you guys aren't already familiar. So if you've looked at like course history for these guys, just know it was at a completely different venue. And that's usually the case with these national opens. The Canadian Open is going to be played at Toronto for quite a few years. I think for the next 2-3 years, they're going to be at the same golf course, but this is the first time that we're seeing it. So it's 7,400 yards, a par 70. If you guys have seen any of the content that I've put out, I don't really see one skill set taking this thing down. I've heard a lot of people saying the bomber narrative being very popular on a week like this. And, driving distance, the extra power long iron play, I do think is a factor at this golf course. But we haven't seen it in play before. I mean, if you saw the Memorial a few weeks ago and that long golf course, you probably thought that it'd be all bombers there too. But we know at Jack's Place, at the Memorial, Muirfield Village, that oftentimes it's the accuracy guys that end up playing well. So the reason why I mentioned this off the bat with this new golf course is that this is a really good week to get different to the rest of the field. If the prevailing narrative is putting people on one set of players and, you maybe have a little bit of a different take on how the golf course is going to play, then you can really lean into that. And the last example that we had this on tour was at the Truist Championship, was where Philly Cricket Club was the golf course that we were playing, which eerily enough is a very similar golf course to what we have here. And the prevailing narrative that week was to play a lot of bombers, the same thing that you're hearing at this golf course, which I would say it's a little bit more fitting for this venue as it is a little bit longer. But that week, after hearing a lot of people spewing that bomber narrative, you had Sepp Straka win. You had a bunch of players in that top 5, top 10 that were gaining a majority of their strokes with the approach play and the putting. So I would say put out a word of caution, I guess, for a lot of you guys out there. I know a lot of us sweaty tryhards like to take in as much content as humanly possible. We like to think that we know exactly how things are going to play out ahead of times. Just know that we don't. This is a brand new golf course. Even the players themselves in their interviews don't really have a good sense for how this golf course is going to play. Rory, based on his remarks, made it seem like it was going to be a very straightforward test. And if they didn't get any rain, was probably going to play pretty easy. Whereas you heard quotes from a few other players like Corey Connors in particular that made it sound a whole lot more difficult. So if these players, even after getting to play it a few times this week for practice rounds, still aren't even sure how it's going to play, then how can can we as handicappers, people that are playing DFS, have any sort of confidence in ourselves? And I say that as somebody that takes a lot of pride in what I do with my golf analysis. You guys know it's not just the DFS stuff that I do. I do a lot of prop stuff for every single round. I'm always trying to project scoring averages, birdie averages, bogey averages, etc. and etc. And even somebody that is as tuned in as I am, and I don't really think there's many other people out there that are as tuned in as I am when it comes to these golf courses, still has my confidence level as like a 5 out of 10 with how I think this golf course is going to play. So for me, especially when it comes to DFS, what we're about to talk up here, it's a game theory week. It's a week to go out there and get different to the field, because if we have no real sense of how this golf course is exactly going to play, then why would we want to share our ownership with the whole rest of the field? And I can tell you that we're going to go through the ownership here in just a few minutes after we get through the weather section, that there are plenty of ownership pivots to get to. So if you want to take that stance to go, you know what, no one really knows what they're talking about at a brand new golf course, I'm going to play that ownership game, this is the perfect week to do so. And, you know, I like to get into the weeds with proximity buckets, trying to figure out exactly where the iron shots are going to be coming from. But even the truth is with that, and I use Pro Visualizer to help me with a lot of that stuff, is we don't know where players are going to lay up, where maybe they're going to take it over the corner where we don't see it from some of those overhead views. And we also don't have accurate tee box representation on any of the overhead views yet. So I've seen people in the industry this week, I'm not going to say any names in particular, that, you know, putting out very specific data for this golf course that is all speculative, right? And I think it's great to try and get into the weeds and break down these golf courses, but to act like we have this crystal ball and know exactly how it's going to play is, I think, a mistake that a lot of people that are newer to DFS don't want to fall into, right? If you're a tout, you're somebody that is very in tune with these golf courses, then maybe you are in a better position to make that kind of stand on these golf courses. But if you're just listening to a podcast or two out there, right, you're habitual PGA DFS player, just know that a lot of those people that are talking about this track are probably going to end up being wrong when it comes to the end of the weekend. There'll be some that get it right, some that end up getting it wrong. And unless you pick the right tout and the right person to follow with that narrative, then it could be a really ugly week for you. So I would say a vast majority of you people out there, and the way that I'm handling my lineups out here is just to go, you know what? We don't know what's going to happen this week. So I went form. I went players that are just high upside players in general, maybe missed prices on the board. And then I went the low-owned game theory plays. I want to jam in as many of those low-owned players into my player pool as possible. That's how I'm handling this sort of slate. So I like to, every single time we get one of these brand new golf courses, to kind of give that talk there, because I see way too many pieces of content. I don't watch all of them. I only watch a handful of publications every single week, more of the bigger ones, just so I know what the rest of the industry is kind of getting fed with their information. And it pains me every single time that this happens, is everyone wants to feel like they're 100% right about how the golf course will play. And the truth is, and I try to be as blunt and as transparent as humanly possible with my process, that no one really has a clue with how this golf course is going to play. And then my guy Tambo, my guys Hoop, they had a show earlier today. I wasn't able to catch it in full quite yet, but I'm assuming it was the same kind of thing that they were talking about, right? Where they're like, you know what, if all these people are going to be playing the bomber narrative out there, then maybe we take a stance against it. So maybe someone in chat that was able to catch both shows, be able to go ahead and let me know if they're going that same direction. But that's normally what I do with these new golf courses, which, speaking of, let's take a look at the weather as well, which I do see a little bit something brewing over the next day or so. So we'll talk about that too. Let's catch up on chat, see if anyone has any hot takes on the golf course. What's going on? MN Holla. Alan says, we don't play donkey chalk until we do. I love that. You made it, Nick. Welcome on in. Yeah, I got to say, these earlier live streams probably do a lot for you. And he said, you think you heard somebody saying something about par 5 scoring and you're thinking there's only 2 par 5s? That's what I mean, man. And hey, people make mistakes, right? So let's not grill people too bad about doing that. But you're right. Yeah. I'm looking at par 4 scoring because there are extra par 4s when we have a par 70, but that's the exact kind of info that I'm talking about, man, right? Like, maybe that's an egregious example of somebody getting it wrong, but I mean, hell, my take on the golf course, I have a pretty specific take, and I think I'm probably going to get some stuff wrong too. Just not act like we have that crystal ball, right? He said, yeah, they're pretty much on the same page. Cool. That's good to hear. And I think that's the right take when we have a new golf course, guys, is don't get too bogged down into the weeds and going like, I can't play this guy because he's not a good course fit. By the way, if that thought goes through your head tonight, get it out of there, right? Take an exorcism, get those thoughts out of your head. We don't know what the course fit is. So I guess if you have to break a tie, you can go with what you think the golf course is going to play to break that tie. But just know that, hey, a lot of us are going to get it wrong this week, that's for sure. But with the weather, I do kind of see something brewing. It's not a massive edge or anything, but tomorrow morning, it's going to be raining during play, at least with this HRRR forecast. They've got it raining for all but 2 hours during the morning wave, which if that's the case, I do think the PM wave tomorrow is going to play significantly easier. The issue is if you take a look at some of the other modeling for Thursday, it's not calling for as consistent of rain. So for example, this HRDPS has it a little bit more spotty, which in that case, it might only be like a quarter of a stroke difference from morning to afternoon. This NEM model also has it only going on for about half of that morning wave. And some of these models, this one's a little bit more consistent. This one would be an absolutely dreadful forecast for the morning wave. If it's a steady stream of rain the entire time, that might be a half a stroke to a stroke harder than what you have in the afternoon. This weather forecast is spotty, but I would say that the PM wave looks like it might get an advantage. And it is a very, very sketchy advantage, I would say, just because it depends on the rain being that consistent. But like this ECM model, this GFS model, it's calling for pretty consistent rain that entire morning. The thought process with the PM wave tomorrow would be that they're going to be getting very soft conditions. They're also not going to have much wind to contend with. You can see sub 10 miles an hour the entire afternoon. And if all that rain comes down, there's a chance it's lift clean in place. No wind, sunny conditions, mid 60s is perfect for the temperatures, and that PM wave nukes. And it might not be a massive difference for the first day. Maybe it is only a half a stroke, as the rain does look pretty spotty in some of those models. But on Friday morning, it kind of flips on its head too, because if we go to the HRDPS or this NEM model, I guess NEM is completely loaded in. So let's go ahead and bring that one up. It looks pretty ideal Friday morning. It's still going to be super soft after the inch of rain that they're expecting between today and tomorrow. It's about a quarter inch today. I think a half an inch to 0.75 inches that they're expecting for Thursday. So Friday morning, you'd expect it to still be soft out there. These guys be able to go out there, throw some darts and whatnot. And then as the afternoon goes on, it's not like it gets super windy or anything, but it's going to start to dry out a little bit, right? Even Friday morning, it's going to be a little bit drier than what you had for Thursday afternoon. And I would say that the half a stroke difference that might be there round one, might not be there, right? Depends on when that rain comes through. If we do get a half a stroke there, then maybe it's like a quarter of a stroke on Friday, right? Those early guys with the softer conditions might get a slight advantage out there. That's 0.75 shots there, maybe with the potential to get up to an entire stroke between the two waves. If that were to happen, that could be significant enough to play in some lineups, but it's nothing for sure. So what I'm personally doing is I took 25 of my 150 lineups. So that is 1/6 of my large field GPP exposure. And I only played guys that were in the PM/AM wave. So those are guys going out late tomorrow after a lot of that rain comes through, and then going off early on that Friday morning tee time. So again, it's a very small percentage of my lineups, but in case they end up having to play through an absolute slog tomorrow morning, then I want to have some exposure to those sort of lineups. But like the PSA I like to give sometimes with these weather edges, it's a very, very slight edge at the very most. In fact, if I was entering a single entry, that sort of thing, I would completely ignore it. It would not be a part of my process. And hey, even if I only had like 2 to 5 lineups that I was entering, it wouldn't be a part of my process either. It's really only something that I'm considering because I'm a 150 max player, somebody that is entering a large portfolio of lineups. And when you have to have the absolute nuts, sometimes a weather edge is nice to be had, but it's very sketchy at the very least. I mean, if it is spotty tomorrow morning, and let's say it is like a quarter stroke advantage towards the PM guys, then maybe it is like a half a stroke difference between the 2 days. Like I do think the PM wave, even in that scenario, probably does get the slightly better side of things. But if it's like a quarter of a stroke difference, then that could be next to nothing when it's all said and done. A quarter stroke difference over a 4-round sample size like you have with these events isn't enough to put you on guys or to take you off of other guys when it comes to your exposure. And there might be like a handful of players difference between like who makes the cut, right? Maybe slightly, 4 or 5 guys more from the PM wave that are making it to the weekend. But outside of like some of your guys in the 6K range using it as a 50-50 split, that's as far as I would take it when it comes to the weather there. So that's it from that perspective. If you have any specific questions when it comes to the weather, you can feel free to let me know. Just to further go into that Friday forecast, we had this NEM one on here before. GFS is another model that I like to use, and it looks pretty flat on Friday as well. So in the morning, sub 5 miles an hour sustained winds. In the afternoon, it's the same with the sustained. Wind gusts are a little bit more significant than what you have in the morning, but really not by much, only getting to 8-9 miles an hour. It looks pretty flat on Friday. I don't think there's going to be a massive edge either way. The only difference on Friday, I'd say, between this model than the NEM that we were looking at before would be the firmness of the greens and them getting a little bit crunchier as the day goes on. But overall, not really the kind of main slate where I'm leaning into it all too heavily. I would say for Showdown tomorrow that it's a tough one. I would want the PM guys, I would think, for Showdown tomorrow, just because they don't have as much weather risk as what you have in the morning wave. And with the temperatures getting up to, being in the mid 60s will help you out on this golf course, because just to remind you, it's 7,400 yards and it's a par 70. So this isn't a completely pushover of a golf course. It's not short for a par 70 by any means. So getting that extra 5 to 10 yards with your drives in the afternoon, I think could also matter and make it a little bit easier tomorrow. So maybe the biggest quote unquote edge when it comes to the weather for the first few days might be round one Showdown and playing some of those PM guys, because the vast majority of your casual PGA DFS players, by casual, I mean ones that aren't really fully deep diving the weather for every given slate, right? Maybe they're entering a lineup or two into the big $5 or $25 GPP on the toilet, middle of the night. You guys get the deal, right? People that aren't really sweaty tryhards like you see here in these kind of live streams, they'll just take a lot of the boarding guys. They'll bring up their phone, they'll go to the tee times, try and take some high upside guys in the morning. A lot of times that can make a lot of sense. Usually the greens are softer in the morning, but I don't think that that's the side to play for tomorrow. So I would say like the biggest edge might be to play round one Showdown and then to take some of those PM guys. But the next thing we're going to go through is going to be ownership towards the top end of the board. So let's go ahead and bring that up now. I've got ownership from 8K plus on here. And now we're going to go through any player deep dives as well. So if there's anyone that you want me to go through the shots gained metrics with, feel free to go ahead and let me know. We've got the last 12 rounds on here, also the last 24 rounds. Also, event history and recent form, which event history is kind of useless, so we probably won't spend too much time there. But if there's anyone that you want me to give you the pros and cons of playing, maybe an idea of ownership, go ahead and let me know. But before we do so, we're going to talk about ownership from 8K plus. And the idea here is to give you guys the thought process and the strategy when it comes to building a player pool. All week, you've heard content. We already mentioned that and referred to that before, where you probably have an idea of some of your top plays towards the top. Now, the other aspect is when you're getting here to Wednesday and putting together lineups is we have to consider the game theory. And you might have some chalky guys in your player pool. Like, for example, I like a Shane Lowry. I like myself some Sam Burns this week. Heck, Rory McIlroy is making a few of my lineups as well, and he's almost 36% owned. It's okay to have chalky players in your player pool because it's not who you play, it's how you play them. And I know that's something that my guy Tambo says all the time, but it's so true. You can have these guys that are 15 to 20% plus owned in your player pool, as long as you're not using 2 to 3 of them together in lineups. You might be able to get away with using 2 of them together, particularly if they're spend up options towards the top end of the board. But your other 3-4 players in your player pool better be where you're getting different to the field. So just to point out some of that chalk towards the top, Rory McIlroy, the obvious piece of chalk, I've got him at just under 36%. It is worth noting that these are from my Patreon page. These are not from the SHIPIT Nation site. So they may differ a little bit from what they have on their site, but this will give you guys a general idea of where the ownership is coming in. So Rory, obvious chalk towards the top, but Shane Lowry, Corey Connors at nearly 18 to 19%. Taylor Pendrith, the Sam Burns, also getting up there with the ownership. It's not always the case that in this 9K range, we see this kind of polarization, but you're getting it this week. And by polarization, I mean that you're getting a pretty decent difference from the high to the low owned players. Sometimes we don't get very much polarization in this 8-9K range. And the high owned guys will be like 16, 17%. And then your low owned players, and I'll put that in quotes, low owned players might be like 12 to 13% owned. It's still not a drastic change. Like Luke Clanton is your lowest owned 9K guy at about a 12%, 11.9%. But you do have guys like a Pendrith, Lowry, Sam Burns, as we've already pointed out, that are getting a little bit of extra steam. So it's not to say that they're unplayable. For example, you can see a Lowry Burns are going to be a big part of my exposure this week. It's just that when you're using those sort of players, you're not getting any of that differentiation. So if you're going to be trying to find pivots and offset that ownership, you're going to have to do it elsewhere. But up top, you do have a few players that you could get kind of cute with. That would include a Ludwig Gobert, a Robert McIntyre, who's last year's champion, even a Sungjae Im or a Keith Mitchell and Clanton are a step down in ownership where, you know, it's not going to make a drastic change with your game theory, but let's say that you really want to sneak in like a 7K guy who's like 7 to 10% owned. A good way to slightly offset that would be to maybe take yourself from a Shane Lowry and then get to a pivot like a Robert McIntyre instead. It is only a 5% ownership difference, but that little bit helps, especially if you're planning on taking chalk elsewhere. So up top, I don't think you have to get cute, hence why you see me playing some of the more popular options. It's worth noting as well that guys like Lowry and Sam Burns for me were players that I liked on Monday. They're players that I bet outright. You can see I took Lowry for the outright at 22-1. I also bet Sam Burns for the outright at 30-1 on Monday. And my take on chalk towards the top end of the board is if you liked them on Monday, they were outrights for you. They were guys that you knew were going to be conviction plays as soon as you saw the pricing, then use them no matter what. I don't really see a reason to talk yourself off of those sort of plays. A lot of times for me, it's Scotty, right? If I see Scotty like winning a golf tournament or like at worst finishing top 3, top 5, which has been almost every time that he's played in 2025, like I'll commit to him on Monday. I'll say, you know what? I know he's going to be a super high owned player and I'm going to use him no matter what. What I do with ownership outside of that, though, is if there aren't guys that, or I should say, if there are guys that are getting a whole bunch of ownership, but I wasn't completely sold on them on a Monday, then you're going to see me fading those sort of players. So I know on here I have my player pool blacked out. I do have to keep those behind the paywall for my Patreon people. But Taylor Pendrith, I'll just tell you guys right now, is not in my player pool. And it's not to say that he's a terrible play. I actually project him, if you take a look at the fantasy points tab on that Patreon version, he's actually one of the better projecting plays in this range. However, I didn't love him on Monday. I liked the guys around him a little bit more when it came to how I was handicapping the golf course. So that's why I'm choosing to play those sort of pieces of chalk. So you're going to pick your guys up top. It doesn't have to be the same guys as me. Like if you loved Taylor Pendrith and you weren't really on a Shane Lowry or Sam Burns, then I think that's totally fine. It's just that you should not be playing every single piece of chalk towards the top end of the board. And that's even coming as a 150 max player like myself. I have a lot more lineups than a lot of you probably do to work with. You know, a lot of people out there aren't 150 maxing for every single slate. If you are, even if you do have that 150 lineup net, you should still be trying to find some of the higher end guys towards the top to fade. So, right, for example, it's not even just a Taylor Pendrith that I'm not playing. There are a few other higher end guys here towards the top end of the pricing that I just have to jam out of lineups and try and find some leverage on. So I would say the ownership is a little bit more interesting than what we have for a lot of slates, because there are times, by the way, where this ownership in the 9K range is even flatter than what we have now. And this is a pretty flat slate, like I said, but sometimes it's like 16% versus 13, 14%, and there's no leverage to be had there. And then down here in the 8K range, something that I noticed as well is that the 8K range is a lot lower owned than we typically see. The highest owned player in the 8K range is 9.9%. So just getting to that 10% mark on an Alex Noren. Your lowest owned player, so this is an example of a range without a whole lot of polarization. In fact, this is probably an example of the exact opposite of what we had in the 9K range, right? 9K range was a little bit more spread out. This 8K range is so tight. I mean, your lowest owned guy is Wyndham Clark, and he's still 6.5% owned. That's a 3.4% ownership difference from your highest to your lowest owned player. So what that means in this 8K range is that it really, ownership almost doesn't matter in this range. Like you just almost play whoever the heck you want to, because even the quote unquote pivots here aren't going to give you that much leverage. But in general, they're all pretty low owned. Like if you took them in 25% of your lineups, you could get leverage to the field. It's just that there's no difference really between who you take. So for example, if you're a big Max Homa guy this week, you could play him. If you're a big Alex Noren guy, you go ahead and do so too. I will say I'm not really a big Noren or a Homa guy this week. They are also one of the higher owned players in that range. But there are players here that did fit the bill for what I was looking for in players. So I think that there are some low-owned guys you could take in that 8K range, which there are always low-owned guys, I guess, in that range. It's just that sometimes we have guys that are like 15% owned in the 8K range, and that is just not the case this week. So there's not really any massive pieces of chalk that you have to worry about there. And what it also does tell us as well, too, is that a lot of people are going double spend up. So they're taking maybe a Rory and then another spend up. And if they're not taking a Rory, maybe it's a Coco or an Aubert as their first man in. And then they're dropping down to like a Burns, Sunjay Hall as their second man in. That sort of lineup construction and then going down to the 7K range is going to be a lot more popular than people going one guy up top. So maybe starting with a Lowry, McIntyre, Pendrith, and then dropping down to this 8K range and taking 2 to 3 players here. Because they're all like sub 10% owned, that just doesn't feel like a very popular sort of lineup construction. So if you wanted to get different just based on where you're spending your salary, I think that would be the way you'd have to do it. I think the double spend up you're going to have guys in the 6K range that can get you different with the pure ownership and that product ownership. But to do it with the actual lineup construction, it'd be this portion of the board. Let's see. Yeah, smash the like button, guys, if you guys haven't already. It helps get it out there to even more people. Let's see. What about David Hearn? Never heard of the guy. He's been around forever, Zach. He's one of like the old PGA Tour players that I believe is in his 40s now. So 10 years ago was a little bit more of a mainstay. He's from Canada. He usually plays the Canadian Open, I think, on an exemption, and that's how he is. That's how he's in the field this week. Let's see. You think? I think you have mentioned looking at driving accuracy. I have, yes. If it's wet in the morning, how deep is? You said with how deep the rough is, I think is what you're saying. Would that be an advantage? I would say that is why I was looking at driving accuracy, Steven. Maybe I misinterpreted your question. It was kind of tough to parse through that there. But yeah, with how wet it's going to be, I do think that's going to put an emphasis on driving accuracy. And it would be that way for the first 2 rounds. Like that water is not just going to evaporate out of nowhere. By the time you get to like Friday evening, I do think it's starting to dry out a little bit, but so are the greens, which might overcome that sort of difference. So yeah, I do think driving accuracy matters, and even more so where they're getting that sort of rain. That would even add on top of that. Can I take a look at Vince Whaley? For sure I can. So let's just go through the different tabs that we have over here. So we'll start with his recent form. I think this is why some people are looking to play him. He's had really good putting stats, also gaining off the tee. The one red flag I guess we'd have to point out would be the approach play. He is losing in that category. And then if we go to the last 24 rounds, it's the exact same. He's not gaining as much with the off the tee or the putter, but in terms of like where he's gaining and losing, it's the same exact kind of stat profile. So you kind of know what you're getting with Vince Whaley. This golf course, I actually don't think is a terrible setup for him whatsoever. The only reason that I have against playing a Vince Whaley is that you are paying a premium for him. He is $7,400 now. He's normally like a lower 7K guy, even a middle 6K guy in a lot of the different tournaments that we have. So he's also going to be a little bit higher owned for that reason as well, because he's not in the 6K range, not going to be getting him at like 1 to maybe 2% ownership. Now it's going to be at like 4 to 5%. So I usually choose to play guys like Whaley when they're going to be unowned, when they're in the 6K range and no one's going to be on them. That's not to say that he's unplayable though, right? That's just my personal role with Vince Whaley. He's been around forever. He's been around like 6-7 years at this point, and that's just kind of been my role for him ever since he's joined the tour. I do have to say though that form we just went through is some of the better form we've seen from him for quite some time. Kevin Yu, okay, we can take a look at his stats as well, of course. Let's bring up good old Kevin, who's Yetchin Yu on some of the different sites out there. Losing on approach. He's gaining off the tee and gaining with the putter. So that's the last 12 rounds. Let's go to the last 24 now. Last 24 is a little bit better with the approach play. So I do like to see that. But the putter does go from positive to negative. So Kevin Yu is always a strong driver of the golf ball. If you're a believer in the bomber narrative, which I'm okay with this week, I don't want to say that being a bomber is a bad thing. Especially, I know that I said that being a soft golf course, the rain kind of helps driving accuracy. It also helps power too. So I think the really good drivers of the golf ball, people that can hit it long and straight, are going to be at a massive advantage for the first few days, because not only can you avoid the rough, which is going to be gnarly, but you're also going to be able to hit the ball further and take on the golf course that's playing a little bit longer. Kevin Yu's exactly that. He's an elite driver of the golf ball. He hits it long and straight. Last 24 round sample size is a relatively large sample. It's 6 full events of shots gained metrics. He's gaining a lot more than everyone else in this range. So I kind of like Kevin Yu for that reason. I think he's a high upside ball striker. Jake Knapp too. He's that same sort of player, and I kind of slightly prefer Jake Knapp here. He's the player that you'll see in my exposure this week, but Kevin Yu's that same kind of course fit. So I'd have to give him like a 6.5 out of 10. And the shots gained metrics are the reason for that. And just the course fit too. Like I know I mentioned before, not going too overboard with the course fit, but based on what I'm looking at, I'm not against it. Luke, for round 1 showdown with the 2 par 5s being 1 in 18, am I putting anything into guys starting on 10? Ooh, that's a good idea, Alan. I didn't really consider that until your question, to be honest. But now that you've pointed it out, I think there could be something to that. I'm assuming that the birdie rate on both is going to be around 40-50% plus, especially hole one. Hole one, a little bit easier than hole number 18. So yeah, maybe you could use it as a tiebreaker, Alan, but I usually like to point out that even when you have a perfect birdie streak situation, that it's like a one fantasy point difference at most between the two different waves. So don't go overboard with it. Like, you'd only use it when you're trying to choose between two players and you can't parse between them. It's just super close on a lot of the different categories you're using. You can maybe make that like check number 4 or 5 that you're using, but it certainly shouldn't be like check number 1 or 2 that you're using. You should be going through the rest of your process before getting there. Could I take a look at Benny Yen? I absolutely can. I do want to say we're going to talk about him in full a little bit later. So actually, we'll just do it now, right? We don't have to do it in any sort of order, right? This is my show. We can change it up if we want to. Yeah, Benny Yen, $7,400. He's only 5.3% owned. I love him this week. I mean, I know he's been playing terrible golf. That's why he's cheap now. That's why not a lot of people want to play him. He's number 126 in my model ranking, but this is a buy low spot, right? This is a long-term talent sort of play. If you use a 50-round sample size, which I don't usually use for a lot of my DFS projections, just a little bit too far out for me to use personally, I will take a look at it, though, to get a sense of a player's actual talent level, particularly somebody that's in a downswing like Benny Yen. Benny Yen is a $9,000 golfer. I mean, realistically, he's better than Harry Hall is. We all know that, especially if you take a look at like the last 50 to 100 round sample size. And he's $7,400 and no one's playing him. Yes, I love Benny Yen this week. Now, the shots gained metrics are terrible, right? There's a reason why he's so far down here. Losing on approach, also losing with the putter. But some of these guys just have a bad run of it. It happens to everyone, right? Not everyone's going to be firing on all cylinders their entire life, for their entire career or anything like that. And when they bounce back, you can get them at low ownership, a lower price tag like this. That's where I'll take a shot on them. Now, would I use them as a conviction play in my single entries? Probably not. That would be a very risky option if you'd use a Benny in that sort of format. But in 150 max pull, in the large $5 or $25, you bet my ass I'm going to be playing some Benny Yen this week. And in fact, you can see I've been in for a top 10 at plus 700 as well. So I like the way you're thinking, man. I just hope that the ownership stays low, because that's kind of the idea there, right? Is take him at low ownership, a little bit of a bounce back spot, and see if he can get us a top 5, a top 10. Mr. Tom Kim, I see. I'm going to look at Tom Sim, as some people would call him. Let's go to the last 24 rounds, because he's been playing the same way for quite some time. He's just close, but he's not quite there yet, because these shots gained metrics with the ball striking are worrisome. If you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, he's gotten a little bit better, but not by much, right? He's still struggling in those two categories. So he's been very consistently shitty with how he's hitting the golf ball. Just like Benny Yen, this is the sort of player that at some point you'd expect to bounce back, and he's a multiple-time tour winner. Right? If you're going to take a bounce back candidate, I think there's much worse players that you could do it with, especially somebody that has so much top 5, top 10 upside as a Tom Kim. And just to remind you guys, within his last 25 starts on the PGA Tour, he's got 5 top 3 finishes out of those 25 starts. So let's not act like Tom Kim is so completely lost at this point. Like, sure, his last 5, 6 events, I don't think he has better than a top 25 during that stretch. So it has been the absolute struggle bus for him. But that happens to even the world's best players at times. So yeah, large field GPP play, probably wouldn't use him in single entries, but he's got the kind of talent level to get back to it at some point. What do the shots gained stats look like for Justin Rose? So last couple of weeks, they've taken a downturn with the ball striking. He's had a rough go at it in some of these longer golf courses, losing across the board actually over his last 12 rounds. So not much positive there, but let's zoom out a little bit, see if we can find something a little bit better for Rosie. So yeah, over the last 24 rounds, so if we double that sample size, he's a positive on approach, which is great. That shows us the iron player was really good before it went way into the negative. Just a little bit into the negative off the tee, which, considering that he was so negative over the last 12 rounds, he was hitting the ball really solid before it went sideways. And same thing with the short game, right? A lot closer to the positive there. So this is a buy low spot. He's another player that's really struggled lately. And I would say at a golf course where we kind of don't know what to expect, I like those bounce back candidates. So yeah, Jay Rose, 6.5, 7 out of 10 as well. Hey, Luke, thoughts on EVR and Sam Ryder? So EVR, by the way, he qualified for the U.S. Open. He's playing some really good golf right now. Ball striking stats are otherworldly. Just to show you guys exactly how he's hitting it, let's go to the last 24 rounds, which, by the way, his starts haven't even been that great outside of the second place to with Scottie Scheffler. But over that massive sample size, full 6 events, he's gaining across all 4 stat categories. So that's amazing for EVR. I like the momentum with him qualifying for the Open this week. And then Sam Ryder, his stat profile isn't as favorable, but I still like him around this sort of golf course. Just because he's not getting a lot of ownership. Now, the shots gained metrics are a little bit putting heavy over the last 24 rounds. If we zoom into the last 12, let's see how he looks over that sample size. Not as putting heavy. He does have a little bit more significant gains with the approach play. He's a 5.5, 6 out of 10 on Ryder, but EVR, 6.5, 7 out of 10. I really like him. Cougar Collins is the ultimate sleeper. Yeah, he's sleeping with all the Cougars up there in Canada, I guess. Hell of a name. Guy's got to have an absolute, I don't even know the way to put it. He's got to have a lot of one-liners with that sort of name. Thoughts on Hodges? He's popping for you despite the not great results, but overall doesn't look terrible. I actually agree with you there, Adam. He's somebody that I am using in lineups. You may have actually caught that when we were scrolling through this before. I took him for a first-round leader at 100-1. He is one of the best round 1 scorers that we have on the PGA Tour. In fact, if you see anyone on the left over here with a first-round leader bet, it's all because they're the top 5 first-round scorers on tour this year. That was Harry Hall, Keith Mitchell, of course. He is always first round leader. So, of course, I had to bet him. Lee Hodges, Putnam, and who was the other one? Sam Ryder at 75-1. If you take a look at the round 1 scoring list, they're literally the top 5 on tour, not named Scottie Scheffler. So just to get back to the Hodges play, I like that aspect. He is a relatively aggressive player. And if you're a believer in the long iron driving accuracy course, that's kind of why I like guys like Shane Lowry this week. Also, why I could see myself playing guys like Lee Hodges and Andrew Putnam, then you could play him, and he's low owned. So, yeah, I don't think your process is crazy for getting onto a Hodges. If you're looking at the last 50-round sample size, it's going to put you onto those sort of guys. What is the lowest priced guy that I'm playing and why? So I'm not going to give you the exact name, David. I do have to keep some of that stuff behind the paywall for my people. There's a place where you can see exactly who it is, but it's $6,500 is as cheap as I'm going. And there are 2 players at $6,500 I'm playing. So, and the one thing I will add with that is I'm not playing any of the random guys that we've never seen before. So that would include like the Korn Ferry Tour guys that haven't played on the tour before. That include all these random Canadians that I didn't even know existed before this week. I'm not playing any of those sort of guys. So my recommendation, if you're dumpster diving down low, is to play guys that are tour players. Play guys that you've actually seen before and not people that you heard on a podcast going like, oh, he's been really good on the PGA Tour Canadas. No crap, he's been good on the PGA Tour Canadas because that tour is like the single A tour compared to the Korn Ferry. It's not even remotely as strong as what you have in the Korn Ferry Tour. And then even if you do it on the Korn Ferry Tour for me lately, that doesn't even mean that much. Like I know it's a very competitive tour, but like even the best guys on that tour aren't world beaters out here on this tour, let alone worth playing in your DFS lineups just because they have a few top 10s, top 20s. So yeah, my recommendation, David, is don't go too far into that range. I cut it off at $6,500 and there's one guy, and I'm not going to say this name because Nick, he gave me one sleeper play down low that I'm not using, but I actually could see playing. That's not a PGA Tour guy. Other than one guy in that 6K range, and I'm not going to name who he is because I'm not steaming him up, Nick. Don't worry. I couldn't see playing anyone else there. They're all just like randoms. Like David Hearn, for example, we had the question about him before. Maybe he pops for one round. I think Showdown would be the place to use those sort of guys. I wouldn't do it in your main slate lineups. Seeing a lot of people looking at Fox, Higgs, and Smalley and Schmid. Do I see any similarities with those players? I guess the distance. I mean, Higgs isn't super long, but Fox, Smalley, and Schmid are. They're also good long iron players. Higgs isn't short off the tee, though. Andy is a good long iron player. So, yeah, it's probably those 2 things. More than likely the long iron play that's really tying those 4 together. I'm not against it. I've seen a lot of them on betting cards this week, so I'm assuming that's kind of what you mean with that. It's the form. Fox is really hitting his irons well. Same thing with Harry Higgs. Smalley, not so much. Schmid, we know he's playing well, right? He almost won the CJ Cup Byron Nelson. It's probably a lot of that. What am I thinking with the Canadians? I think they're overrated this week. I hate to be that guy, and sorry to any of my Canadian brethren that are watching this up north, but I mean, they're overpriced this week, right? They got the Canada bump, as you always see for this event. Like guys like Nick Taylor, Mackenzie Hughes, Corey Connors, they're all probably $500 too expensive, I would say. Not that they're unplayable, though. I mean, they're playing really good golf, especially Corey. Corey is in my player pool, by the way. I'm using him this week. But even like a Hughes and Nick Taylor, I mean, Nick Taylor almost won the week before. They're usable. They're just expensive, and you're going to be taking some ownership on them this week too, because people love playing Canadians at the Canadian Open, which, you know, it's a narrative thing. Maybe it's people playing their hometown guys. I couldn't blame you, but it doesn't always work out that well. It's a lot of pressure playing at home. It's tough, and I fully understand that. I mean, if I was a Canadian playing at home, there would be a lot of pressure on me. Thoughts on Harry Hall? Great form, Kevin. So that's really the one thing with Harry Hall that I'd point out is he's got over 2 shots gained per round over his last 12 rounds. If you want an informed player, he's going to cost you a bunch at 9,200. You definitely get that. Once you get past Burns, you feel like you want to pivot from anyone chalky. You feel like there's 7 guys in the 7s that are as good as the 8s. I agree with you on that, Steven. Yeah, I'd say the 6 and 7K chalk is really where I'm making my stands too. Thoughts on Nick Taylor and Connors? So yeah, I like Corey Connors this week. So I'm playing Corey Connors myself. Doesn't mean you have to do so yourself. He is coming with some ownership. That is the issue with these Canadians, right? Is that you're going to be getting the extra 4 to 5% ownership and the extra $500 price tag on almost all of them. Corey Connors, though, is the one that's appropriately priced. Like, he should be $10,100. He's one of the best players that we have in this field. Now, Mackenzie Hughes, should he be $8,900? Hell no. Should Nick Taylor be $8,800? Hell no, right? But are they playing decent enough golf, like especially Nick Taylor, at $8,800 to consider playing him? For sure. Especially because he's won this event before. You have 3% David Hearn in the Minimax. You're saying those who are not SHIPIT Nation should join and figure out why. I'm guessing it's because he's on the course fit rankings, right? I don't want to spoil it for anyone, Adam, but you know what? That could be a move. He has played these golf courses up in Canada pretty well, so I don't want to crap talk him too much. He could definitely get there. He said you're fading all the Canadians. Trevor Cohn is your sleeper pick. Trevor Cohn, he qualified for the U.S. Open, so he has that going for him, kind of like an EVR. And I do have to say, too, I've looked at some of the shots gained metrics on Cohn this week. Don't ask me why. I deep dive even the nasty plays towards the bottom. He's got really good approach stats, so I don't think it's the worst thing I've ever seen. Like, he's a 6 out of 10. Which is really rare for a Cone. Cone's normally a 2 or a 3 out of 10. Thoughts on Mitchell and Clanton? Really good drivers of the golf ball, Brian. With the fact that they're getting the rain, I think they're even better course fits here. At least based on how I'm breaking it down, right? We only know so much about this course, so I always like to add that there. Like, I could be completely wrong about how I'm breaking this thing down, but with the added moisture out there, being long and straight is how I see there being an advantage. Mitchell's one of the longest and straightest guys on tour. Luke Clanton, his superpower is his driver. That's by far the best part of his game. I'm liking that for those two, and that's why I'm playing them this week. Will Chandler, 1 through 10. Oof. I mean, instant reactions, a 2 or a 3 out of 10, but let's look at the shots gained metrics. I know he's been playing a lot better golf than a lot of these other guys at the bottom end of the board, so I have a feeling that the ranking is going to go up here after we take a look at these stats. Let's see, where's... if I could spell his name right, it'd get him to come up. We got to put the N before the D. So last 24 rounds, not that great. I actually thought they'd look a little bit better. Let's go to the last 12. Maybe it's a little bit better for good old Chandler. Not much. Losing in 3 of the 4 categories. I hate to say it, but 3 out of 10. I mean, there's just not much to latch onto here, right? He gains around the green. That's where he's into the green over the last 2 sample sizes. It's going to be a no-go for me. Yeah, 3 out of 10, man. He said, sorry for the typos. You actually have a vision disability. All good, man. He said, but your fingers forget that sometimes. We usually figure out what you're saying, Steven, so no apologies there. I just want to make sure that I'm getting your question answered for you correctly. So if I ever don't get it, just feel free to let me know afterwards when I got it wrong, right? What's going on, Tom? He says, on tiers contest, do I consider ownership? Ooh, I don't play tiers, Tom, so I'm not the best person to ask for that. I like to be as transparent as possible with questions, right? Especially ones that I'm not, an expert on. However, just kind of thinking through, yeah, I mean, ownership would matter because you still have to leverage and try and beat other people and move up in those contests. It's just so hard to get a gauge for that ownership because it's going to be different than large field GPP. So that's a good question, man. Maybe someone in chat has a better answer for you that has more experience on playing tiers. But for me, it matters. It's just so hard to know where that ownership's going to come in. Does Joel Damon have an upside at 6,800? Yes, he does. He's got some of the best iron form in the field, so I'll be playing him in a few lineups. Can I deep dive Thorbjorn Olesen? I for sure can. And I really like Thor this week, so I like where you're going with this. So let's go back up to the top. He's gaining both off the tee and on approach, actually about a stroke per round over his last 12 rounds. And if we zoom out to the last 24 rounds, it's gaining about a stroke per round as well. 0.46 off the tee, 0.52 strokes per round with the approach play. He's one of the most consistent ball strikers that we have in the field. You're going to be in Kingston next week and just realized today that you're only 4.5 hours from the course, thinking you might have to make it one day. You should, dude. I mean, I'll be out there all 4 days. You want to come say hi, grab a beer or two? Feel free, man. It'll be a whole lot of fun. I got to say that golf course, this U.S. Open, it's one you probably won't want to miss, I'd say. Can you take a look at Nico Højgaard? I absolutely can. So I like the long iron play for Højgaard. I like the ball striking play for him, but he's been a little bit inconsistent lately. He hasn't had as many of the top end finishes as we'd maybe hope for. Let's see if I can get him to load here. So there's Rasmus. Let's find Nico. So gaining ball striking over his last 24 rounds. If we go to the last 12 rounds, I believe it's the same exact thing. In fact, about a neutral off the tee and then gaining about a half a stroke per round with the iron play. If you're a believer in the bomber narrative and long iron play, and you're probably playing some Nico Højgaard, I'd say. He fits those two boxes rather well. How am I feeling about Matt McCarty? Are my McCarty senses tingling? Ooh. So no, they're not, Alan. To answer your question, I don't really have that gut feeling on him this week. I've had a pretty good sense for him on his tour career so far. I will say, though, that Matt McCarty is a stud. Like, I'm not playing him this week, but if you were even half considering using him, play him, you're not going to be disappointed by him. Like, if he makes the cut, he's going to make a crap ton of birdies. He's a really good putter. He's a good iron player. He sets up plenty of looks and then converts quite often. He's somebody you're going to see me playing a lot more often than most people. How do I find the top first-round leader, guys? Of course, so go to PGAtour.com, Brian, click on stats, go to scoring, and then if you scroll down, you can find the round one scoring. That's what I do for first-round leaders. I know it sounds really simple, but you play the guys that play really good in round one, and it might end up working out. Random Canadians, good band name. Scobie. Yeah, dude, this is what the Scobie guy down towards the bottom, right, from Canada. He'd be the one guy to go off this week, huh? Matthew Scobie. He's kind of sounds like, who's that kicker that used to play? It was like Jake Scobie or something. The kicker for the Steelers who just missed every freaking kick. Luckily, I've forgotten his name because he was so terrible. Is Connors my favorite Canadian? He is, but I'm not playing that many Canadians, so he's one of the only ones I'm actually playing. LOL, or he could. Yep, that's the or he could on David Hearn for sure. Shane, Connors, or Hall for one and done. So I'll give you some pros and cons on those. So Shane Lowry is going to be either the most popular or second most popular to Corey Connors out of those three. So if you're looking to get different, let's say you're starting way behind Kevin, you'd go Harry Hall, because you're not going to see that many people using Harry Hall in their one and dones this week. So if you have a lot of ground to make up, you go in that direction. But those first two are better fits. So if you're in contention or towards the top end of your one and done, I'd probably go Shane Lowry and then Corey Connors as my number two, just because I think Shane's going to be utilized a little bit less. And yeah, dude, it's Josh Scobie. Oh my God. I never wanted to see that name again. As a Steeler fan, he lost us like 3 games in a row. I mean, he got booed out of town. I've never seen somebody that hated on by a fan base before. Being a kicker's a really tough job, guys. You have one bad week and you get crucified. I feel bad. Did we talk Rico Hoey? So we haven't talked him yet. We'll talk him now, Wayne. He fits a lot of the advanced stats that I was looking at. So heading into this week, doing my course preview on Bet the Number, he fit a lot of the stat categories that I wasn't really expecting him to fit. Like, for example, he's a good bent POA putter. He's obviously good off the tee player, but if we go to the last 12 measured rounds, I mean, this form's kind of sneaky here. He's gaining a bunch off the tee. The putter has really held him back, 1.2 strokes into the negative. But if this is a surface where for this year, he's gaining about a half a stroke per round, that's been his baseline in 2025 on bent grass, then it's going to be a really good week for him. So I'm at a 6 out of 10 on Rico, which, considering that he's been playing some crappy golf, is actually pretty good. How do we feel about Castillo? Oh boy. One of my favorite plays, dude. He's actually one of my value plays, $7,200. I bet him for a top 20 at plus 375. He's getting some ownership, which is unfortunate because I was hoping to get him at sub 5%, but 7.7% ownership isn't enough to draw me off of him. So I'll be using them in quite a few of my builds. All right, let's talk about a few other plays I wanted to point out before we round this off with a little bit of strategy. So we talked about Jake Knapp a little bit before, but I did want to point him out as one of the top 10 bets that I'm placing. And more importantly, it's not that I want to give you guys your player pool for this week. In fact, in an ideal situation, I want to lower own Jake Knapp, right? So you don't have to play him. In fact, I'd prefer you not to, so that I could get lower ownership on him. But I do want to point this out just to give you guys the thought process, right? And what I'm doing here, because Jake Knapp, he's about average to below average ownership in this range, and he fits that predominant narrative, right? He's a bomber. He's a really good long iron player, yet I haven't heard him talked up by the masses. And the effect of that is that he's much lower owned than guys like a Ryan Fox are, than guys like an Alex Smalley are, who may have slightly better stat profiles. But Jake Knapp, for example, he's gaining in the 3T to green category. So the reason why I point out Jake Knapp here is not to say that you have to play him yourself. Like I said, I'd rather him be lower owned. So unless you love him, like, don't use them. But the idea is, if you can find people that fit that prevailing narrative but aren't as highly owned, that could be a way to still play that sort of an idea, a narrative, a course fit, and not be as chalky as a lot of the other people there. And, another example of that would be a Benny Ann. I know we had the question about him before. He's a bomber who's usually a really good long iron player. So I'm taking a shot on him and only about 5% ownership. As Sam Ryder, I mostly wanted to point him out because he was a first round leader bet, but a Nikolai Højgaard, right? I know we just had the question about him. He's in my player pool too, because he's not the mega chalky guy like an EVR. I know I said that he has a really good stat profile. He's coming in with all this momentum, but everyone sees that. He's going to be by far the most popular player at this portion of the board. So if you want to get a little bit different, and it's not that much different because Højgaard still is 8% owned. That is higher ownership than a lot of the other guys around him. But give me a player that is playing just as good a golf, especially with the iron play. Højgaard's actually been better with the iron play than EVR over that recent stretch, and he's the lower owned between the two. So it's to give you guys perspective into what I'm looking for. I'm still using a lot of the same kind of stats that you see around the rest of the industry. I'm just not playing the mega chalky guys at a golf course that's brand new. So an Emiliano Grillo fits that same sort of narrative as well. He is about 8% owned, so kind of like Højgaard. I wouldn't call him a low-owned player in this 7K range, but he's one of the best iron players that we have in this field, coming in with really good form. It's a top 20 model ranking play. The kind of guy that I'll play, especially when he's a little bit lower owned than some of the other people's favorites in this range. So Lee Hodges and Andrew Putnam, I pointed those two players out before as spots where I'll take a look at the less 50 round sample size and play that long-term talent level as opposed to their recent form. Those are the kind of guys that you'll see in my lineups. And there's not a whole bunch of 6K guys that you're going to see in my player pool. In fact, I think there's like 10 guys in the 6K range that I'm using in my lineups, which is less than what I typically have. The 7K range, though, I think there's a lot of really good players towards the bottom end of the 7K range. Hodges, Putnam are examples. Grillo, obviously one of those guys that I'm using as well, that you can find as slight pivots to the rest of the guys around them that I think are even better players than a lot of these guys. Like a Quade Cummins I'm using. Like, I know he doesn't seem like a great play on paper, but he's good on this bent POA surface. Also has really good shots gained ball striking stats over the last few events. This is where I'm rounding out my lineups. I'm not going the whole way down to these random guys at the bottom. Like, I know we've had questions about a lot of these guys down here. It's a really tough scene to want to play any of these guys. Like, most of them suck. Most of them aren't in good form. Like, there are, I guess, a couple exceptions to the rule. Like, maybe I could see playing like 2-3 guys that are below $6,500, but you're not going to see it in my exposure this week. So hopefully it gives you guys an idea of exactly where my exposure is coming in, to give you guys an idea of exactly what to look for in your plays. And as I mentioned before, all of this is found on my Patreon page. So if you guys want to see all my projections, player poll, and all of that, you guys can find that over there. But what we're going to do next is we're going to talk through some strategy before we round this thing off, and I get started with my prop stuff. So first off, with the contest selection segment, a lot of your main contests are already filled, but you do have some secondaries that are posted. So for example, you've got this Drive the Green, which is the secondary. You also have the secondary driver as well. Sorry, wrong contest. The secondary sand trap, or is that a secondary or the primary? I'm guessing that's the primary because it's 200K to first. So yeah, if you're looking to get into one of the primary GPPs, you still have one of the two left. It is the $25 though, so it's going to cost you a lot more to 150 max that. This smaller $5 though isn't the worst thing I've ever seen. It is a little top heavy with it being a fifth to first place, but it's pretty much the same thing as what we get for showdown. So if you prefer the showdown slates as opposed to like the big main slates playing against like 20,000 entries, then maybe going to that drive the green makes a lot of sense. But mostly it's single entries at this point, right? If you've missed the boat on a lot of the other contests, like the drivers make sense. This one's a little bit top heavy there. It is a fifth to first place as well. But when you start to get into some of the smaller drivers, this is also a fifth to first. So kind of sucks that they're not doing the flatter payout structure single entries with some of the bigger ones. This one's a sixth to first. Actually, yeah, don't enter that contest. We're not going to talk about why. That was weird that DraftKings did that in that contest. But yeah, those single entries are typically the contests that you want to enter because they have flatter payout structures. I'm trying to find, like, this is the dog leg. This actually just filled as we were on live stream there. But that contest is a lot flatter than what you have with like a fifth or a sixth to first place. So let's see, is the $12 albatross still there? So yes, they still have this albatross. This one's a great example of a flat payout structure where rather than a fifth or a sixth to first place, you're getting a 10th to first place, which gives a lot of extra money for the rest of the top 5, top 10 for you to be able to get at least 10, 20, even 30x your entry fee for getting one of those top level finishes, which the fifth to sixth to first place ones, like they're not the worst, but let's say that this was like 5 or 6K to first instead. I mean, look at the drastic impact that's going to have on the rest of this, because that's probably taking away $500 from second, $250 there, $100 or $200 from all these other spots, which doesn't seem like a massive difference. Like, it's not going to have a massive difference for one specific slate, but long term, it's going to mean that you're going to have to be in first place a lot more often to have those kind of long-term results you're looking for. So that's why I look for these sort of contests instead, where if you are still finishing in the top 5, top 10, you're still getting 10 to 20x your entry fee, which is going to be massive for sustaining your bankroll. So not just those, you can go to the 20 maxes as well. A lot of those have flatter payout structures than those large field GPPs. And what I normally look for is like a 7th to first or less. Like, it's a 7th to first, an 8th to first, a 10th to first is really what you're mostly looking for in contests. Those are the best ones to go out there and max enter. And then when putting together lineups, I mean, we've already gone through a lot of stuff on what you should be thinking about when building lineups, but it's all about your differentiation, all about making sure that you have enough leverage in your lineups. So it's okay if you have a piece of chalk or two up top. So like, for example, if you start with a Lowry, Sam Burns, those are two of my core plays. I'm going to have plenty of lineups that start with those two together. Just make sure with your last 4 spots that you're getting that differentiation. So for example, in this 8K range, if you're in the large field GPP, there's not a whole lot of chalk there. So you can kind of play whoever the heck you want to in this 8K range. So let's just throw in Olsen just because the shots gained metrics, especially with the ball striking, were pretty favorable on him before. So we're getting him at sub 10%. And then as long as your last few players here aren't mega chalk, mega chalk, mega chalk, you're going to be totally fine. So for example, you might want to avoid going to like a Ryan Fox and then another chalky guy. Like, let's see, who was real popular? EVR, I guess, like 7,300. Then if your last man in was another chalky guy, like let's say, even Grillo's getting some ownership, like a Grillo, a Phillips at $7,100. That kind of lap in the large field GPP might be a little bit borderline on whether you'd get away with it. So that's why if you're going to start with chalk like a Lowry, a Burns up top, rather than getting to your Foxes of the world down here that are a little bit higher owned in the 7K range, that's why you'll see me making slightly more differentiated plays. Like, for example, Jake Knapp, who's a little bit lower owned, rather than going to Cam Young, who, by the way, I love this week, but he's like 15% owned. Maybe rather than taking a super chalky Cam Young, I go down and I play a Benny Ann instead, right? So you can start to see me making some of these ownership pivots in the 7K range to offset that chalk that I've taken towards the top. And maybe you still want to play, let's say, a piece of chalk towards the top end of the 7K range. So, for example, I mean, there's not a bunch of chalk here. I guess let's go with Ryan Fox, just like we were looking at before. Maybe up top, that's where you go, you know what? I'm going to try and make a stand up top rather than going to a Sam Burns. You know, I'm going to drop down to a Luke Clanton, who's a little bit lower owned. Like, you get the idea, right? Going from somebody that's a little bit higher owned to a little bit lower owned, that might be able to offset some of the ownership of the Ryan Fox. And while you're last man in, you're still going to have somebody that gets you different to the field to offset that chalk. It does give you a little bit more ability to take some chalk in that 7K range. So when you're building lineups, right, it's always about giving and taking with the ownership, making sure that you have enough differentiation in there, but also making sure that you're still building lineups that have a chance, right? That aren't just pivots across the board, because pivots are a pivot for a reason, right? There's a reason why they're going to be lower owned than some of their peers. It's oftentimes because they're not as good of plays. So that's it for the lineup construction segment. That's it for the live stream in general, guys. I've got to get out of here to be able to do my prop stream on my channel, which, by the way, if you're looking for the underdog and prize pick stuff for round one, also any matchups on the sports books like DraftKings and FanDuel, make sure to tune in the live stream right now on my YouTube. That'll be any minute now over there. I'll be going live in just a couple minutes after I freshen up here for a second, going through all of that. So that'll be stat averages for round one, also weather and how that'll impact play tomorrow specifically. We'll go through some pin locations and just completely deep dive the betting side for tomorrow's action. So here we obviously went through all the fantasy stuff. We're getting you guys ready for all those DraftKings lineups. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs. It'd be nice to take something down, get the bankroll going, flushed and full of the pockets before we head to Oakmont, because that event, that major, it's going to be one that I'm playing pretty heavily on with the exposure. So it'd be nice to have even more to play with for that sort of event. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck, as I was mentioning before. I'll see if there's any last second questions I can go through real quickly here, and then we're going to get over to the prop side. Let's see. Don't sleep on nap. I see what you did there. Guy in the back is taking a nap. I love what you guys are doing there. And by the way, shout out to DGen. What's going on, Chris? You said Hubbard. I've seen his name thrown around a little bit. I'm at a 6 out of 10 on him, Chris. I kind of get it, but I'm not there completely like a lot of other people are. Heard guys saying Scam Young won. Was it an open qualifier? Yeah, he did. He won a playoff, actually, Brian. So he wasn't in first place at the qualifier. He was in like 4th or 5th and had to earn his way in. I liked him before that happened. A lot of people seem to like him after that. Chalk Cam Young is terrifying. I agree with that, by the way. I was playing him, or at least I pointed him out as a play when I thought he was going to be like 5% out before he went out and won that qualifier. Thoughts on O'Bear and Bobby Mack? Poor form. Yeah, poor form, but good course fits, Brian. So if you want to bounce back, really good players that have won before on tour are always okay in my book for a bounce back. Like, I'll take a play on that long-term talent level all day. He said, appreciate you, Luke. Great job as usual. I appreciate you, Adam. Best of luck this week. And are you missing something on Hoey? You see him as lower owned to feel like his driver alone is worth more ownership. I agree with you, man. And if you check out the course breakdown I did like on Monday, I'll save you the full watch because it's like 15 minutes. But I looked at some very specific categories for this golf course, and it wasn't just the off the tee play. Like, he was a good bent POA putter. He was good from 150 to 200. He was good at bogey avoidance, which no one would really think that with Rico Hoey, right? That he's a good bogey avoidance player, but he is. I don't know. I think he's a good sleeper play, man. And then Dumpy Bo 1 through 10, 5 out of 10. I don't have a hot take on him either way, to be frank. The off the tee play is kind of sketchy, but I think you might be able to get away with it around here. Yeah, 5 out of 10. We'll leave it there. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got. I appreciate all your support on the channel, as you guys always show. And see you guys for the round 2 through 4 live streams.